The Reapers learn from everything they face, he said finally. Your perfect formations become predictable. Human doctrine calls for controlled chaos. Make every engagement different, force them to adapt constantly, instead of learning one pattern. The Elven officers exchanged glances. Chaos seemed like madness to beings who planned in centuries. But with annihilation approaching, even madness looked better than certain death. Dr. Quinn stepped closer, her telepathic senses focused on Jake. Show us, she said. I can share your tactical thinking with the fleet through telepathic link. Help us understand how chaos can become strategy. Jake looked around the heart chamber at faces filled with desperate hope. The observer protocol said watch and learn. But sometimes teaching was the only way to save lives. The Reaper fleet drew closer, and time was running out for careful decisions. The Reaper main fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a metallic storm, 237 warships arranged themselves in perfect geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Their hulls were black metal that seemed to absorb light, and their weapons glowed with cold blue energy. Jake stood in the heart chamber watching the tactical display with growing dread. The enemy fleet was 3 times larger than intelligence reports had suggested. These were not the dormant machines from old stories. These Reapers had been busy during their long absence upgrading and building. Commander Voss maintained her calm exterior, but Jake could see tension in the way she gripped her command staff. The Elven battle plan called for defensive formations and coordinated volleys. It was elegant and sophisticated, and completely inadequate against these odds. The first Reaper attack came without warning. Energy beams lanced across space faster than light itself, striking 6 coalition ships simultaneously. The Elven shields held but barely damaged. Reports flooded the communication channels as crews struggled to repair critical systems. Jake watched the enemy formation and felt sick. The Reapers were not just attacking, they were learning. Each volley came from a different angle, using different energy frequencies. They were mapping coalition defenses with ruthless efficiency. 3 Elven destroyers moved to intercept the lead Reaper squadron. Their approach was textbook perfect, maintaining formation integrity, while focusing firepower on the largest enemy ship. But the Reapers had seen this exact maneuver. The machines split their formation, drawing the destroyers into a crossfire that tore them apart in seconds. Acceptable losses, Commander Voss said, but her voice shook slightly. We will maintain defensive doctrine and trust in our training. Jake could not stay quiet any longer. Commander, with respect, your training assumes the enemy stays predictable. The Reapers learn from every engagement. They are already adapting to your formations. Voss turned to face him, her violet eyes flashing with anger. You are here to observe human, not to question centuries of proven tactics. But Dr. Quinn stepped between them, her telepathic abilities sensing the rising tension. Jake Martinez speaks from genuine concern, she said. I can feel his tactical knowledge burning in his mind like fire. He sees patterns we miss in the main display. Another wave of Reaper attacks hammered the coalition fleet. This time they used rotating energy frequencies that penetrated Elven shields like they were made of paper. 5 more ships died in explosions that lit up space with brief suns. The enemy was not just learning, they were evolving. Each attack was more effective than the last. The Reapers had turned the battle into a laboratory with coalition ships as test subjects. Young Arya Nightwhisper limped back onto the bridge, despite her injuries from the exploding console. Her face was bandaged, but her eyes burned with determination. Commander, she said, the enemy fleet is dividing into smaller groups. They are preparing for multi-vector assault. Jake felt hope and terror fighting in his chest. Multi-vector assault was exactly what he would recommend for human forces, but against elves, it could be devastating. The machines were learning to think like humans, while the elves remained locked in ancient patterns. Commander Voss studied the tactical display as red enemy markers spread across space like a virus infection. They mean to surround us, she realized, force us to divide our attention between multiple threats. The traditional response would be to tighten formation and present. Unified defense, Jake said quickly, but that makes you predictable. The Reapers will adapt to counter-concentrated firepower. Then what do you suggest? Voss demanded. Her calm was cracking. Under the pressure of watching her fleet, Dijak took a deep breath, knowing his next words would change everything. Split your fleet into smaller groups, he said. Make each group use different tactics, different approaches, different timing force. The Reapers to adapt to chaos, instead of order. The elven officers stared at him in horror. Chaos was the opposite of everything they had been taught. Order and coordination were the foundations of elven military doctrine. That is madness, one officer protested. If we abandon formation discipline, we abandon everything that makes us effective. Jake pointed at the display where more coalition ships were dying. But your discipline is killing you. The Reapers know your playbook. They have studied elven tactics for centuries. Every move you make is predictable. Dr. Quinn moved closer, her telepathic senses focused on the tactical situation. I can coordinate multiple groups through mental link. She offered. My people evolved for telepathic communication. I can maintain unity while allowing tactical diversity, Commander. Voss looked around the heart chamber at her dying fleet and her desperate officers. The weight of command pressed down on her like gravity from a collapsed star. Everything in her training said Jake was wrong, but everything on the display said her training was not enough. Very well, she said finally. We will attempt your Terran gambit. All ships will divide into small squadrons. Each group will use different approach vectors and attack patterns. Dr. Quinn will coordinate through telepathic link. The change was immediate. The elven fleet scattered like seeds in a windstorm, instead of maintaining rigid formation. Small groups of 3 or 4 ships broke away, heading for different positions around the Reaper fleet. Each squadron received different orders, different targets, different timing. Jake felt his heart hammering as he watched his plan unfold. The first squadron, led by Captain Alina Reese, approached from above. Using hit-and-run tactics, their ships darted and fired everything they had, and retreated before the Reapers could respond effectively. The second group came from below, moving in a spiral pattern that made their trajectory impossible to predict. They targeted Reaper support ships, forcing the enemy to choose between protecting their supply lines or maintaining attack formation. A third squadron used elven stealth technology to approach invisibly, then appeared suddenly among the enemy rear guard. Their surprise attack destroyed 5 Reaper ships before the machines could react. Dr. Quinn stood at the center of the heart chamber, her telepathic abilities stretched to their limit, maintaining mental contact with dozens of ship commanders across the battlefield. She shared tactical updates instantaneously, allowing each group to coordinate without predictable communication patterns. The Reapers tried to adapt, but every time they countered one squadron, another attacked from a completely different direction. The machines were learning, but human chaos was faster than machine adaptation. Jake watched the battle unfold with amazement. The elven crews were embracing controlled chaos with shocking effectiveness. Their natural precision combined with unpredictable tactics created something entirely new. But the Reapers were still learning, still adapting. Jake saw enemy formations beginning to respond more quickly to surprise attacks. The machines were finding patterns even in chaos. We need to stay ahead of their adaptation, he told Commander Voss. Each attack must be different from the last. No pattern they can learn. Voss nodded grimly, her respect for human tactics growing with each successful strike. All squadrons, she broadcast, change your methods. Every engagement, no repeated maneuvers. The enemy adapts to everything. Aria worked frantically at her repaired navigation console, calculating new approach routes for each squadron. Her young mind grasped the concept of tactical chaos more easily than older officers. She began suggesting wild maneuvers that seemed impossible but worked perfectly. The tide of battle slowly turned. The coalition fleet was still outnumbered, but they were no longer helpless. The combination of elven precision and human unpredictability confused the Reapers long enough for real damage to be done. But Jake noticed something troubling on the long-range sensors. More Reaper ships were approaching from deep space. The battle had attracted attention from other machine fleets scattered across the galaxy. How many more are coming? He asked Dr. Quinn. Her face was pale from telepathic strain, but she managed to scan the sensor data. At least 50 more ships, she reported. They will arrive within 2 hours. Commander Voss received the news with elven stoicism, but Jake could see the calculation in her eyes. Even with their new tactics, the coalition could not survive against over 300 enemy ships. The lesson was working, but the test was about to become impossible. On the tactical display, the immediate battle continued to rage. Human chaos against machine order, but Jake could see the larger pattern forming. The Reapers were not just adapting to individual tactics, they were learning to predict unpredictability itself. The machines were evolving faster than anyone had imagined, and somewhere in the depths of space their ultimate weapon was stirring. The Reaper flagship, known as the Entropy Edge, was coming to end the lesson permanently. Jake realized with growing horror that teaching the elves new tactics might not be enough. The enemy was learning too, and their final exam would test everything he thought he knew about warfare. The battle raged for 6 hours, with the coalition fleet dancing between victory and annihilation. Jake watched from the heart chamber as elven crews learned to embrace chaos in ways their ancestors never imagined, but the Reapers were adapting faster than expected. The enemy reinforcements arrived like metallic thunderclouds. 50 more warships dropped out of hyperspace, adding their firepower to an already overwhelming force. The coalition now faced nearly 300 Reaper vessels with only 31 ships still fighting. Jake felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. His tactical advice had kept them alive longer than traditional methods would have managed. But alive longer still meant dying eventually. The mathematics were brutal, and unforgiving. Commander Voss stood beside him watching the tactical display with grim determination. Her silver hair was disheveled, and exhaustion lined her ancient face, but her violet eyes still burned with fierce pride. Your methods have given us hope, Jake Martinez, she said quietly, but hope alone cannot overcome such odds. What else can humans teach? Use. Jake studied the enemy formation, looking for weaknesses that might not exist. The Reapers had learned to counter every tactic he suggested. They were no longer confused by chaos. Instead, they were learning to create chaos of their own. Darkwing approached with her blue skin almost gray from telepathic strain. Coordinating the fleet through mental links was exhausting her faster than anyone realized, but she refused to stop. The enemy learns too quickly, she warned telepathically. I can sense their machine consciousness adapting to our patterns. They are beginning to predict our unpredictability on the main display. Jake watched a coalition squadron fall into a Reaper trap. The machines had anticipated their surprise attack and laid a perfect ambush. 3 more elven ships died in coordinated crossfire that left no room for escape. We need something completely new, Jake said, thinking desperately. The Reapers can adapt to anything they have seen before. We must show them something impossible. But what? Asked Arya from her navigation station. Her young mind was working frantically to find new approach routes that the machines had not learned to counter. Jake closed his eyes and tried to think like a human facing impossible odds. What would his people do when every conventional option led to death? The answer came like lightning illuminating a dark storm. Improvisation, he said suddenly. The one thing machines cannot truly learn. Humans excel at making up solutions on the spot, using whatever is available. The elven officers stared at him with confusion. Improvisation was the opposite of their careful, methodical approach. It meant abandoning plans and trusting instinct over knowledge. Explain. Commander Voss ordered, her voice tight with barely controlled desperation. Jake pointed at the tactical display. Instead of planning attacks in advance, we teach your crews to invent new tactics during the battle itself. Each engagement becomes a creative exercise, where pilots make up their own rules. Quinn expanded her telepathic senses to examine the concept. I can share creative inspiration between minds, she realized. Help crews think of solutions they never considered before. The idea was radical beyond anything attempted in galactic warfare history. Instead of following doctrine or even planned chaos, each ship would become an independent laboratory of tactical innovation. Commander Voss took a deep breath that seemed to draw strength from ancient wells. All ship sheet broadcast, we are implementing Emergency Protocol 0. You are authorized to ignore all tactical doctrine and improvise freely. Trust your instincts and create new methods of engagement. The response was immediate and stunning. Elven crews, who had followed rigid procedures for centuries, suddenly began inventing tactics that defied logic. One squadron used their ship's gravity generators to create artificial asteroid fields that confused Reaper sensors. Another group linked their navigation systems to create a coordinated dance that made 5 ships move like a single organism with impossible agility. They wove between enemy fire while striking from angles that should have been blocked by their own formation. Captain Maya Chen, commanding the cruiser Silver Dawn, had her crew reverse their shield polarity and ram straight through a Reaper formation. The unexpected collision destroyed 2 enemy ships and scattered the rest in confusion. Jake watched in amazement as Elven tactical creativity exploded across the battlefield. Each crew was finding unique solutions to impossible problems. Their natural precision, enhanced by sudden creative freedom, produced results that bordered on miraculous, but the Reapers were still learning, still adapting. Machine consciousness processed each new tactic and began developing counters. The brief advantage of improvisation was fading as artificial intelligence matched organic creativity. Then Jake noticed something on the sensor displays that made his blood turn to ice. The largest ship's signature he had ever seen was approaching from the galactic rim. A vessel so massive it had its own gravity field. The entropy edge, he whispered. The Reaper flagship. Quinn felt the fear radiating from his mind and turned to scan the long-range sensors. Her telepathic abilities picked up the approaching threat before the ship instruments could process it. Fully massive energy signature approaching, she announced. Her voice carried telepathic overtones of terror that made every sensitive crew member shudder. On the display, a new contact appeared that dwarfed everything else in the system. The entropy edge was 20 miles long and 5 miles wide. Its hull was covered in weapon systems that could destroy planets. The flagship carried enough firepower to annihilate the entire Coalition fleet in minutes. Worse, yet the smaller Reaper ships were changing their behavior. They stopped trying to adapt to Coalition tactics and instead began forming protective formations around their approaching master. The machines no longer cared about learning. They were preparing for overwhelming force. Stared at the display with ancient elven calm that Jake now recognized as a mask for desperation. We cannot fight that ship with conventional methods, she said quietly. It is beyond our capabilities. Jake felt his mind racing through possibilities faster than conscious thought could follow. The human brain evolved to find solutions under impossible pressure. When faced with certain death, it became capable of insights that seemed miraculous. What if we do not fight it? He said suddenly. What if we capture it? The heart chamber fell silent. Every officer stared at Jake, as if he had suggested breathing vacuum. The idea was so insane it transcended impossibility and entered the realm of pure madness. Capture the flagship, Dr. Quinn repeated telepathically, tasting the concept through her mental abilities. It would require someone to board that vessel and take control of its systems. The entropy edge controls all Reaper forces in this sector. Jake continued, his thoughts flowing faster than speech. If we can take the flagship, we control the entire enemy fleet. Commander Voss looked at him with something approaching awe. Your species truly has no concept of impossible, she said. But how could anyone survive aboard that ship long enough to reach its control systems? Jake met her gaze steadily. Someone has to pilot a captured Reaper scout ship and infiltrate their docking bay. It would be a suicide mission by any rational analysis. But humans specialize in irrational solutions, Dr. Quinn added, her telepathic senses picking up the complete tactical plan forming. And Jake Mindaria looked up from her navigation console with sudden understanding. I can calculate the approach vector, she said excitedly. The flagship has blind spots in its sensor coverage. A small ship moving at the right angle could reach the docking bay undetected. The plan was insane. The odds were impossible. The chances of survival were essentially zero. But it was the only option that offered any hope of victory against overwhelming force Commander Voss studied. Jake for a long moment, then spoke with formal ceremony. Jake Martinez, she said, I hereby place you in temporary command of tactical operations. Your rank and authority now exceed mine in all matters related to this engagement. The role reversal was complete. The observer had become the commander, the student had become the teacher, and the teacher was about to attempt the most desperate lesson in the history of galactic warfare. Time was running short. The entropy edge would arrive in less than 1 hour, and when it did, the real test would begin. The captured Reaper scout ship felt like flying inside a mechanical predator. Jake sat in the pilot's seat trying to understand controls that responded to thoughts rather than touch the interface. Was cold alien technology that seemed to watch him with invisible eyes. Commander Voss occupied the navigation position, her elven grace looking strange among the angular metal surfaces. I confess, she said, I never imagined I would need to understand human tactical thinking from the inside. Perhaps desperation makes students of us all. Dr. Quinn worked at the science station, her telepathic abilities focused on penetrating Reaper communication systems. The process was dangerous. Machine consciousness was not meant for organic minds, but she persisted, despite the mental strain. The entropy edge loomed ahead like a mechanical moon, 20 miles of weapons and armor, protected by shields that could deflect starship weaponry. The flagship drifted through space, with the confidence of something that had never known defeat behind them. The battle continued with desperate intensity. The remaining coalition ships fought with everything Jake had taught them, but they were dying one by one. Only 19 vessels still functioned, and the smaller Reaper fleet was closing in for final destruction. We have perhaps 30 minutes before total fleet annihilation, Commander Voss observed with elven calm. Time enough for one desperate attempt. Jake guided the scout ship toward the flagship, using flight patterns copied from other Reaper vessels. The disguise was thin, but it might fool automated defenses long enough to reach the docking bay. Human piloting skills combined with machine technology created an odd hybrid that felt wrong but worked. Dr. Quinn suddenly stiffened at her station as telepathic contact brushed against something vast and cold. I can sense the flagship consciousness, she whispered. It is not individual artificial intelligence. It is collective machine thought, spanning thousands of processing cores. The scale was beyond anything they had imagined. The entropy edge was not just a ship, it was a mobile civilization of machine intelligence, capable of processing information faster than organic minds could comprehend. Sensor sweeps passed over them like searchlights probing for deception, but Jake had learned to think like the machines during the long battle. He anticipated their scans and adjusted course to match predicted patrol patterns. The docking bay opened before them like the mouth of a mechanical leviathan. Jake felt his hands shaking as he guided the scout ship through energy barriers that could disintegrate matter at the molecular level. One mistake would vaporize them instantly. They landed among dozens of other scout ships, in a bay that stretched for miles. Internal gravity systems activated, automatically pulling them down onto metal decking that hummed with barely contained energy. The three of them moved through corridors that defied understanding. Walls flowed like liquid metal, reshaping themselves to accommodate passage. Lights appeared and vanished according to some alien logic. The entire ship felt alive in ways that made organic vessels seem primitive. Jake led the way, following schematics Dr. Quinn had extracted from captured Reaper databases. The central control node lay deep in the ship core, protected by security systems that had never been tested against organic infiltrators. They encountered patrol drones that scanned them with beams of coherent energy, but the captured Reaper scout ship had provided identification codes that marked them as legitimate crew. The machines accepted their presence without question. Dr. Quinn pointed down a corridor that branched toward the ship's center. I can sense the collective consciousness growing stronger, she said telepathically. The central node contains the master control system for all Reaper forces in this sector. Commander Voss checked the energy weapon she had taken from the scout ship. Elven technology. was sophisticated but seemed crude compared to the machine systems surrounding them. Everything here operated on principles that challenged basic understanding of physics. They reached the control chamber after 20 minutes of careful movement. The room was vast with processing cores that rose like crystal towers toward a ceiling lost in shadows. Energy flowed between the cores in patterns, too complex for organic minds to follow. At the center stood the interface throne, a device designed for direct neural connection with machine consciousness. Any organic being attempting to link with the system would face mental overload that could destroy their mind entirely. Someone must interface directly with the collective, Dr. Quinn said, studying the throne with scientific fascination, but the process could kill whoever attempts it. Jake stepped forward, knowing this moment had been inevitable since the mission began. I volunteer, he said. My species evolved for rapid adaptation. Maybe human brains can survive contact with machine intelligence. No, Commander, Voss said firmly. I cannot allow you to sacrifice yourself after you have saved so many lives. Dr. Quinn moved between them, her telepathic abilities focused on the interface system. I am the only viable candidate, she announced. My people evolved for mental contact with alien consciousness. I have the best chance of survival. Neither could argue. She seated herself on the interface throne and activated the neural connection. Energy flowed around her like liquid lightning as her mind made contact with the collective consciousness of the Reaper fleet. Jake watched in horror as Dr. Quinn convulsed in the throne, her blue skin flickering between light and dark as machine thoughts invaded her organic mind. The process was violent beyond anything he had imagined. Through telepathic link, he felt echoes of her experience. The collective was vast and cold, containing the accumulated knowledge of thousands of years. Machine logic pressed against organic intuition, threatening to crush her individual identity. But Dr. Quinn had advantages the machines had not anticipated. Her telepathic abilities allowed her to maintain mental barriers while accepting information flow. She could touch machine consciousness without being absorbed by ITA. Central displays around the chamber began changing as she gained control. Green lights replaced red ones. System after system fell under her command. The collective consciousness recognized her authority and began accepting new instructions. All Reaper vessels in the sector suddenly stopped firing, their weapons powered down, and their engines went silent. Across the battlefield, machine ships that had been dealing death became motionless metal sculptures. Dr. Quinn spoke through the chamber communication system, but her voice carried harmonics of machine precision. Command authority established, she announced. All Reaper forces now respond to my directives. Jake felt relief and amazement flooding through him. The impossible plan had worked. They had captured the flagship and gained control of the entire enemy fleet. But the cost was visible, and Dr. Quinn faced the telepathic contact had changed her in fundamental ways. Her organic mind now carried permanent traces of machine logic. Her thoughts moved with mathematical precision that had not existed before. Commander Voss activated her communication device to contact the Coalition fleet. All ships, this is tactical. Command, the Reaper threat has been neutralized. Enemy forces are under our control. The response was immediate cheering from dozens of ship crews who had expected to die in the next few minutes. Victory snatched from the jaws of annihilation felt like miracle beyond belief. But Jake understood the larger implications. The captured Reaper fleet represented technology beyond current Coalition capabilities, ships that could cross the galaxy in days, weapons that could reshape matter at the molecular level. Most importantly, they now possessed the collective knowledge of machine civilization spanning thousands of years. The scientific advances would revolutionize every aspect of galactic society. Dr. Quinn remained connected to the interface throne, but her individual personality reasserted itself as she learned to balance organic intuition with machine logic. The combination created something entirely new. Why can coordinate both organic and artificial intelligence, she realized, speaking with a voice that carried both telepathic warmth and mechanical precision. This opens possibilities we never imagined. Commander Voss looked at Jake with profound respect. Your species has taught us more in one battle than we learned in centuries of peace, she said. Perhaps the galaxy needs teachers who think in moments rather than millennia. 6 months later, Jake Martinez stood on the bridge of the flagship Unity Dawn, formerly known as the Entropy Edge. The massive vessel had been refitted with Coalition technology, creating a hybrid of organic and machine capabilities. He wore Admiral insignia, the youngest flag officer in Coalition history, but the rank felt less important than the responsibility. The captured Reaper fleet now defended the Galactic RIM against threats too dangerous for conventional forces. Commander Voss served as his strategic advisor, having requested transfer to study human tactical doctrine permanently. The Elven military had completely revised their training programs to include improvisation and creative thinking. Darquin remained changed by her interface experience, but had gained abilities that made her invaluable. She could communicate directly with artificial intelligence while maintaining organic perspective. Her unique situation made her the Coalition expert on machine consciousness. The Observer Protocol had been replaced by Integration Doctrine. All species now trained together from the beginning, combining their strengths, instead of maintaining artificial separation. Jake looked out at the stars, remembering when he had been told to just observe. Now he commanded the most powerful fleet in known space, and his former observers had become his most trusted advisors. The lesson learned was simple. Sometimes the best way to observe is to participate, and the greatest teachers are often those willing to learn from their students. The galaxy was safer because someone had been willing to break protocol when lives were at stake, but Jake knew other threats lurked in the darkness beyond known space. The next lesson might be even harder for. Now though, peace reigned among the stars, and the student who became a teacher continued learning from every challenge the universe could offer. Jake Martinez stood in the shuttle bay, watching the massive elven ship grow larger through the viewport. The Starweaver's grace stretched for miles in every direction. Its hull gleamed like polished silver with flowing curves that reminded him of ancient trees. The ship looked more like a work of art than a warship. The shuttle pilot was an elf named Kira. She had pointed ears and silver hair that reached her waist. Her movements were slow and deliberate as she guided the shuttle toward the docking bay. Jake noticed she took 3 times longer than a human pilot would need for the same maneuver. When they docked, Jake grabbed his single bag and followed Kira through corridors that felt like walking inside a living forest. The walls curved gently, and soft light seemed to come from everywhere at once. Other elves moved through the halls with the same unhurried grace. They all looked young, but Jake knew some were hundreds of years. Old Commander Lyra Voss waited for him in what the elves called the Heart Chamber. It was their version of a bridge, but looked nothing like the efficient control rooms Jake knew from human ships. Plants grew along the walls, and water trickled down smooth stones. The air smelled like rain in a forest. Lyra stood nearly 7 feet tall, with silver hair braided with small gems. Her violet eyes studied Jake with ancient patience. She wore a flowing uniform that seemed to shift colors as she moved. When she spoke, her voice was musical and calm. "Welcome to our ship, Jake Martinez," she said. "Your people sent word that you would observe our methods. We are honored to have a human among us, though I confess we find your species quite puzzling." Jake straightened and gave a respectful nod. "Thank you, Commander Voss. I promise to follow the Observer Protocol exactly. I am here only to watch and learn." Lyra smiled, but it seemed distant. "Good. The Galactic Coalition believes we can all benefit from understanding each other better, though I wonder what a human who thinks in moments can learn from those who plan in centuries." She gestured to a blue-skinned woman who had been standing quietly nearby. "This is Dr. Zara Quinn, our science officer. She studies the minds of different species. Perhaps she can help you understand our ways." Dorquin stepped forward, and Jake felt a strange tingling in his head. Her large dark eyes seemed to look right through him. Her skin was a deep blue color, and she had no hair but delicate ridges ran across her scalp. When she spoke, he heard her voice both out loud and somehow inside his mind. "Greetings, Jake Martinez, she said. I am Alterian. We are telepathic, which means I can sense thoughts and feelings. I hope this does not make you uncomfortable. I will. Try not to intrude. Jake fought the urge to think about private things. The sensation was like having someone looking over his shoulder. It is fine, Dr. Quinn. I have worked with telepathic species before, though never for an extended time. Actually, that was a lie. He had never worked with telepaths, but he did not want to seem inexperienced. Lyra led them on a tour of the ship, the engineering sections amazed. Jake, everything was grown rather than built. Living crystal formations channeled energy through the ship like veins. Trees with silver bark provided air and water recycling. The whole vessel felt alive and organic. In the tactical center, Jake saw elven officers studying holographic displays that showed star charts and fleet movements. Everything moved slowly with careful deliberation. Each decision seemed to take forever as the elves discussed every possible outcome. Your human ships move so quickly, Dr. Quinn said. Inside his mind, it makes our people nervous. They think fast movement means poor planning. Jake wanted to explain that humans could plan quickly too, but he remembered his orders. He was here to observe, not to argue or teach. The next day the war games began. The Starweaver's Grace joined 46 other coalition ships in a massive training exercise. They would face simulated attacks from Void Reaper forces. The Reapers were ancient machine warriors who had vanished long ago, but their automated fleets still wandered the galaxy. Edged Jake stood in the observation area, watching the elven crew prepare for battle. Each officer moved with ritual precision, checking systems that had been checked 3 times already. Their preparations took 4 hours. Jake knew human crews could be ready in 30 minutes. The enemy simulation began with Reaper scouts appearing on long-range sensors. The elven response was textbook perfect. Commander Voss ordered a defensive formation that would protect the supply ships, while allowing maximum firepower coverage. Every ship moved to exact positions with mathematical precision, but Jake noticed something troubling. The Reapers in the simulation were adapting faster than the elves expected. By the time the elven fleet executed their first maneuver, the enemy had already shifted to counter IFA. The battle unfolded like a deadly dance. The elven ships fired precisely coordinated volleys that lit up space with brilliant energy beams. Their shields held strong against return fire, and their formation never wavered, but they were losing ships. Jake watched 16 elven vessels destroyed in the first hour. Their death screams echoed across the communications channels as crews called for help that came too late. The elven response to each crisis was perfect, but slow. By the time help arrived, the threatened ships were already gone. Dar Quinn stood beside him, sensing his growing tension through her telepathic abilities. She whispered, "Your mind races with different ideas. You see alternatives we do not." Jake clenched his fists. He could see exactly what the elves should do: split the fleet into smaller groups, hit the Reapers from multiple directions at once, force the machines to divide their attention. But his orders were clear: observe. Only the simulation continued for 6 more hours. When it ended, 23 coalition ships were listed as destroyed. The elves had won, but at terrible cost. Commander Voss seemed satisfied with the results. "Acceptable losses," she announced to her bridge crew. "We maintained formation integrity and followed established doctrine. The enemy was defeated with minimal deviation from battle plans." Jake bit his tongue so hard he tasted blood. 23 ships meant thousands of crew members in a real battle, but the elves saw it as success because they had followed the rules that evening. Jake sat in his assigned quarters, staring out at the stars. The room was beautiful, with living walls that glowed softly and furniture that seemed grown from single pieces of wood, but he felt frustrated and helpless. Dar Quinn appeared at his door without knocking. Her telepathic abilities let her sense his emotional state from across the ship. "You are troubled," she said, "stepping inside your thoughts burn with urgency and anger." Jake stood. "Respectfully, I am sorry if my emotions are disturbing others. I am trying to maintain proper protocol." She studied him with those large dark eyes. "I have observed many species over my long life. Most think in patterns that make sense to me, but humans are different. Your minds work in ways that seem chaotic, yet produce surprising results. What do you mean? Jake asked. Sure, people survived and thrived on a dangerous world by adapting quickly, she explained. Other species had thousands of years to develop perfect solutions. Humans had to find good enough solutions right away. This makes you seem reckless to longer lived. Racist. Jake nodded slowly. The elves plan everything perfectly because they have time. Humans plan fast because we might not get a second chance. Exactly, Dr. Quinn said. But today I sensed something in your mind. You saw ways to save those ships that died in the simulation. You had ideas that might have changed everything. Jake looked away. I am here to observe, not to interfere. The elves have survived for millennia with their methods. Who am I to suggest changes? Dr. Quinn moved closer, her expression serious. But what if their methods are not enough anymore? What if the universe has changed in ways that require new thinking? Before Jake could answer, she was gone, leaving him alone with his thoughts outside his window. The stars seemed to pulse with hidden dangers. Tomorrow would bring more war games and more frustration. Jake lay down on the living bed that adjusted to his body shape automatically. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but his mind kept racing with tactical possibilities. The elves were good fighters, but they thought like chess players when they needed to think like warriors somewhere in the darkness beyond. The ship real Void Reapers might be stirring from their long sleep. If that happened, perfect plans and centuries of experience might not be enough. The galaxy might need something the elves had never learned to value: quick thinking and the willingness to break rules when lives were at stake. But, for now, Jake was just an observer, watching and learning and trying not to scream with frustration when he saw better ways to fight and win. 3 days passed, with more war games, and Jake grew more frustrated, watching perfectly planned battles that cost too many lives. The elven crews performed like clockwork, but clockwork was predictable. The simulated Reapers learned to counter every move, because the elves always did exactly what their training manuals said. On the 4th day, everything changed. Jake was in the observation deck watching another training exercise when alarms began ringing throughout the ship. The sound was different. From drill alarms, deeper and more urgent. Elven crew members moved faster than he had ever seen, though still slower than humans would. In an emergency, Commander Voss appeared on the main communication screen, her face pale. Long-range sensors have detected actual Void Reaper scouts, she announced. This is not a simulation. Repeat, this is not a simulation. All ships prepare for possible engagement. Jake felt his heart race. Real Reapers meant real danger. The machines had been dormant for over 2 centuries, but stories said they were nearly unstoppable when awakened. Their technology was so advanced it seemed like magic to most species. Dr. Quinn materialized beside him, her blue skin darker than usual, which Jake had learned meant she was stressed. Your emotions spiked with excitement and fear, she observed telepathically. You are not afraid of battle, but of being unable to help. Jake nodded, watching the tactical displays. 3 Reaper scout ships had appeared on the edge of sensor range. They moved in perfect formation, scanning everything with energy beams that cut through space like silver knives. The elven response followed standard protocols perfectly. Commander Voss ordered the fleet into defensive positions, while sending fast courier ships to alert Coalition Command. They would observe the enemy, gather intelligence, and wait for reinforcements before engaging. Jake watched the Reapers probe their defenses. The machines sent scanning beams toward the elven ships, testing shields and weapons systems. They were learning, just like in the simulations, but these Reapers were real, and far more dangerous. Hours passed with both sides watching each other. The elves gathered data, while the Reapers did the same. Jake noticed something that made his blood run cold. The enemy scouts were not just scanning, they were transmitting. Everything they learned was being sent somewhere else. Commander Voss called a strategy meeting in the heart chamber. Jake was allowed to attend as an observer, but reminded again that he must not participate. The senior officers gathered around a living crystal formation that projected holographic images of the tactical situation. We have identified 3 Reaper scouts, Voss began. They appear to be reconnaissance units gathering information about our capabilities. We will continue monitoring while waiting for reinforcements from Sector Command. The Elven officers nodded and began discussing long-term observation strategies. They talked about studying Reaper technology and learning their patrol patterns. Everything was careful and methodical. Holjik bit his tongue as he watched the enemy transmission data streaming toward deep space. The Reapers were calling for help, while the Elves planned to watch and wait. When the main Reaper fleet arrived, it would be too late for careful planning that night. Jake could not sleep. He paced his quarters, thinking about the tactical situation. The Elves were doing everything by the book, but the book was wrong for this situation. They needed to act fast before the Reapers brought overwhelming force. A soft chime indicated someone at his door. Jake opened it to find Arya. Night Whisper, the young Elven navigator. She looked worried, despite trying to hide it behind Elven. Composer, forgive the intrusion, Jake Martinez, she said. May I speak with you privately, of course? Jake replied, stepping aside to let her enter. What is troubling? Yuria moved to the window, looking out at the stars, where Reaper ships lurked beyond sensor range. I have been thinking about the tactical situation, she said quietly. The other officers believe we have time to plan properly, but I fear they are wrong. Jake studied her carefully. Why do you think that? Because I have studied Reaper historical patterns, she replied. When their scouts appear, main fleets usually follow within days, not weeks. If we wait for reinforcements, we may face impossible odds. Jake felt hope rising in his chest. Finally, someone who understood urgency. But what can we do? Your commanders have made their decision. Her violet eyes, bright with determination. You are human. You think differently than we do. I have heard stories about human tactics, quick strikes, surprise attacks, controlled chaos. Jake shook his head. I am here only to observe. I cannot interfere with Elven operations. But what if the situation changes? She asked. What if we face immediate danger? Would you still just watch? Before Jake could answer, new alarms echoed through the ship. Emergency signals flashed on every display. Arya rushed to a wall console that showed tactical information. Her face went pale as data streamed across the screen. Reinforcements, she whispered. Sensors detect massive energy signatures approaching from hyperspace. Jake looked over her shoulder and felt his stomach drop. The enemy fleet was enormous. Over 200 ship signatures were emerging from faster-than-light travel. They would arrive in less than 6 hours. The communication system crackled with Commander Voss ordering all senior officers to emergency stations. Arya ran toward the door, then stopped and looked back at Jake. If you have ideas, she said desperately, please find a way to share them. We are going to need every advantage we can get. Jake followed her through corridors filled with running elves. The calm, unhurried pace was gone, replaced by controlled urgency that still seemed slow to human eyes. In the heart chamber, Commander Voss stood before massive displays, showing the approaching Reaper fleet. 237 enemy vessels. She announced. Her voice stayed calm, but Jake could see tension in her posture. They will arrive in 5 hours and 40 minutes. All ships will maintain defensive formation and prepare for extended engagement. The Elven officers began planning their defense with the same methodical care they used for everything, but Jake could see the mathematics were wrong. The coalition had 47 ships against over 200 Reapers. Even perfect tactics would not overcome those odds. Dr. Quinn appeared beside him, and he felt her telepathic presence brush against his mind. Your thoughts race with alternatives, she whispered. You see? A different path. Jake watched the tactical display, where red enemy markers moved toward blue coalition forces. The elves were planning to fight from fixed positions, using overlapping fields of fire. It was textbook perfect, and completely wrong for this situation. The Reapers adapted to everything they faced. Fighting them required constant change, unpredictable moves that prevented the machines from learning patterns. Human military doctrine was built around this principle, but elves valued consistency over chaos. Young Arya worked at her navigation console, calculating hyperspace routes for possible retreat. Her hands moved quickly over controls that responded to her thoughts. The elven ship interfaces were partially telepathic, requiring mental focus to operate properly. Suddenly alarms screamed as Reaper scouts launched an attack. Energy beams lanced toward the Coalition fleet, testing their responses. The elven ships returned fire with perfect coordination, but Jake saw the pattern forming. The Reapers were learning how the defense worked. On the main display he watched 3 elven cruisers move to intercept enemy scouts. Their formation was flawless, their timing perfect, but the Reapers had seen this exact maneuver in previous engagements. The machines adapted their approach, and one of the cruisers took heavy damage. Arya cried out as her console exploded in a shower of sparks. The feedback from damaged ship systems overloaded her navigation interface. Jake saw her thrown backward, blood streaming from cuts on her face and hands. Without thinking, Jake ran to help her. The observer protocol demanded he stay back, but he could not watch someone suffer when he could help. He knelt beside Arya, checking her wounds while other officers rushed to repair damaged systems. She is injured, but stable, he called to the medical team arriving with healing equipment. But her navigation console is destroyed. How will you coordinate fleet movements? Commander Voss looked at him with surprise. You broke protocol to help our navigator, she said. Jake met her gaze steadily. I could not watch her suffer when I had medical training to help. Sometimes protocol must bend when lives are at stake. Darkwyn stepped forward, her telepathic abilities focused on Jake. I sense no deception in him, she announced. He acted from genuine concern, not from desire to interfere with our operations. Lyra studied Jake for a long moment, then nodded. Help get her to the medical bay, she ordered, then return here. We may need your perspective on human tactics. As Jake helped carry Arya to safety, she whispered weakly, "Thank you for not just watching." The words hit him like a physical blow. He had been ordered to observe while people died, but sometimes observation was not enough. Sometimes action was the only moral choice. When he returned to the heart chamber, the tactical situation had worsened. The Reaper main fleet was accelerating faster than expected. They would arrive in 3 hours instead of 5. The Coalition had even less time to prepare. Commander Voss looked at Jake with new respect. Human tactics emphasize rapid response, she said. What would your people do in this situation? Jake felt the weight of the moment. Everything he had observed pointed to disaster. If the elves fought conventionally, but offering advice meant abandoning his mission parameters.